Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yep, we definitely needed this one for the jerseys for sure. So I'm excited about these bad boys for sure. That's sick.
A 22-year-old quarterback bet $90,000 on sports while playing college football. And in doing so, he accidentally placed the biggest bet of his life, the one he did not even realize he was making. The bet that his career would survive it. He lost that one too. The NCAA said no. The NFL said no. And on June 26, 2026, the CFL became the third major football league to formally shut its door on Brendan Sorsby, leaving him with nowhere left to play on the entire North American continent. Think about what that actually means for a second. Not one league, not two, three separate governing bodies, each one representing a different level, a different country, a different set of rules, all looked at this same 22-year-old quarterback and arrived at the exact same conclusion. And the brutal irony sitting underneath all of it is that Sorsby was genuinely talented. Not fringe roster talented. Not practice squad talented. NFL draft projection talented. Second team all Big 12 talented. Scouts were circling him talented. The arm was never the problem. The phone was the problem. The app was the problem. The thousands of individual bets placed on sports events while operating under rules that explicitly told him the consequence of doing exactly that. That was the problem. So today, we are walking through every step of how this happened. Because this story has more layers to it than any single headline has been able to hold. Let us go back to where this started. Brendan Sorsby arrived at the University of Cincinnati as a freshman in 2022. He was young, still adjusting to life on a college roster, still developing the mechanics and the football IQ that would eventually make him one of the more electric quarterbacks in his conference. He was the kind of player coaches build offenses around: quick release, good pocket mobility, natural feel for the game. Somewhere in that adjustment period, away from the practice field and away from the film room, he made a decision that would quietly build toward everything that followed. He started gambling on sports. Not in a small way, and not just once or twice. Over the course of his time at Cincinnati, he placed thousands of individual bets, and by the time the full picture emerged during a lawsuit hearing, the total attached to those wagers was more than $90,000. Let that sit for a moment. $90,000 from a college athlete operating under one of the strictest eligibility frameworks in American amateur sports. The NCAA rules on sports wagering are not a gray area. They are explicit, they are communicated to athletes constantly, and the consequences are spelled out without ambiguity. Placing bets on sports, any sports, not just the one you play, is a violation that can end eligibility permanently. Among all those wagers, 40 were placed on Indiana basketball during his freshman year of 2022. 40 separate bets. On a sport he had no involvement in whatsoever. During his very first year, on campus, when the NCAA uncovered the scope of it, they followed their rulebook and declared Sorsby permanently ineligible. That was not a warning. That was the organization formally ending his amateur career. But Sorsby and his legal team made clear they were not ready to accept that outcome. This is where the situation becomes legally unusual in ways college athletics had not really seen before. Rather than accepting the decision and mapping a path forward, his attorneys went to court with an argument that completely reframed the case. They did not dispute the bets had happened. What they argued instead was that the NCAA was effectively punishing a young man for symptoms of a medically recognized condition. Sorsby had enrolled in and completed a month-long residential treatment program for gambling addiction, and his team used that diagnosis to frame the permanent ban not as enforcement of a sports integrity rule, but as discrimination against someone who had sought help for a recognized illness. A Texas state judge issued a temporary injunction on that basis, clearing Sorsby to play for Texas Tech, where he had transferred from Cincinnati. Picture what that moment felt like from the outside. After being formally told by the most powerful governing body in college athletics that his eligibility was finished, a state court handed it back to him. He was going to be on the sideline again. He was going to be under center again. Another year of development, another year of tape in front of scouts, another chance to push toward the professional dream he had been working toward his entire life. The response from the college football world was immediate, and it was not warm. Coaches at programs around the country were described in reports as disgusted and stunned by the ruling. The Oklahoma Attorney General publicly called on the Big 12 Conference to discipline Sorsby independently of what the Texas court had decided. The Big 12 itself took the extraordinary step of filing a federal complaint seeking its own jurisdiction to apply conference-level consequences to the situation. Texas Tech stood publicly behind their quarterback and made clear they would honor his place on the roster. But the institutional pressure kept building and escalating with every passing day. New voices, new organizations, new public statements, all of them pointed in the same direction. Sorsby eventually decided to leave Texas Tech, give up his final college season, drop his lawsuit against the NCAA, and apply for the NFL supplemental draft, a secondary process designed specifically for players unable to enter the league through the standard route. The supplemental draft was the clearest path remaining. It had worked before under complicated circumstances. Josh Gordon, whose collegiate career ended over drug policy violations, used it to enter the NFL and build a professional career despite everything that preceded him. There was real precedent for exceptions when talent was undeniably present, and Sorsby's talent was undeniably present. In his final season at Cincinnati, he threw for 2,800 yards and 27 touchdowns against just 5 interceptions over 12 games. He added 580 rushing yards and 9 more touchdowns on the ground and earned second-team All-Big 12 recognition, placing him among the best quarterbacks in one of college football's most competitive conferences. NFL front offices had been paying attention. Multiple analysts projected him as a potential second-round pick heading into any normal draft process. When the NFL Management Council sent its response to the supplemental draft application, the rejection was explained in terms that made the reasoning impossible to misread. Larry Ferazani specifically noted that even after the NCAA revoked his eligibility in May, Sorsby chose litigation over accountability. That pattern, pursuing court remedies rather than accepting the consequences of his own admitted conduct, was framed as a central factor in the denial. The NFL also announced it would not hold a supplemental draft at all in 2026, citing the distraction it would create for franchises heading into training camp. The outcome was the same either way. No NFL football in 2026. And within days, the CFL issued its statement, closing the last professional door he had left. What remains is narrow and uncertain. The junior college route has been raised, but carries its own serious barrier. The NJCAA operates under a completely separate eligibility system from the NCAA, and Sorsby would need a formal review and clearance before any JUCO program could bring him in. That process is not automatic, it is not fast, and given the public nature and scale of everything surrounding his case, it is far from guaranteed. Some football people have speculated about independent leagues and spring developmental circuits, but none of those environments carry the infrastructure or the scouting visibility that would realistically position him for an NFL conversation in 2027. That 2027 NFL draft is the one doorway not formally shut. The league left it open in principle, but sitting out an entire season carries real costs for a quarterback specifically. The position runs on live repetition, real game reads, timing built through actual snaps under pressure. Those things erode without meaningful competition. Add the character and judgment questions that will follow him into every evaluation room, and that 2027 window is not a guarantee. It is a narrow opening that requires an entirely different approach than the one that brought him here. Teams drafting quarterbacks are not simply investing in an arm. They are investing in a person. Right now, every league on this continent is looking at the full picture of this person, and deciding the risk is not worth taking. The hardest part of this story to sit with is how unnecessary all of it was. Sorsby placed tens of thousands of dollars in bets while operating under rules that told him explicitly and repeatedly what the consequence of doing so would be. The comparisons to Pete Rose and Calvin Ridley exist because sports leagues have dealt with gambling violations at every level for decades, and the institutional response has always been consistent. Rose bet on baseball and remains permanently banned despite holding the sport's all-time hits record. Ridley placed bets on NFL games during an injury absence and served a full-season suspension. These consequences exist because the legitimacy of athletic competition depends entirely on outcomes not being shaped by the financial interests of anyone involved. A diagnosed gambling addiction is real and treating it matters, but the diagnosis does not dissolve accountability for choices made while in its grip. What the NFL letter made explicit and what the CFL statement reinforced is that the leagues were not only reacting to the bets themselves, they were reacting to the pattern of behavior that followed being caught. Every institutional line drawn got challenged in court. That escalation, more than the underlying conduct, appears to be what finally closed every door. At 22, this is not necessarily the permanent end. The 2027 draft remains a real possibility if Sorsby uses 2026 to demonstrate something genuinely different from what has defined this chapter. But that path runs through accountability and change behavior, not through another court filing. That shift is the only version of this story that ends with Brendan Sorsby back on a professional field.